All right, let's talk about one of modern history's most fascinating and, frankly, tragic economic stories, the rise and fall of Argentina. Seriously, it's an incredible tale of unbelievable wealth, a dizzying collapse, and a 100-year-long search for some kind of stability. Okay, just to set the scene, I want you to imagine something. You walk into a grocery store, you grab a loaf of bread, and in the few minutes it takes you to get to the checkout line, the price is literally doubled. You start to argue with the cashier, and in that time, it doubles again. This sounds crazy, but for Argentines in the 1980s, this wasn't some weird thought experiment. It was a terrifying reality. So that insane scenario, it really gets you thinking, right? It brings us to the huge central question we're going to tackle here. How does a nation that was once right up there with the United States and Canada, one of the richest on Earth, fall so hard, so fast, and then just get stuck in what feels like a never-ending loop of crisis? To really understand the fall, you first have to appreciate just how high they climbed. We've got to go back to a time when Argentina wasn't a cautionary tale at all. It was a global success story that everyone wanted to copy. So for this incredible 50-year stretch, from about 1880 to 1930, Argentina was an absolute economic powerhouse. By 1913, it was one of the 10 wealthiest nations on the entire planet. Think about that. So many people were moving there for a better life that by 1914, almost a third of the population was foreign-born. It was a true global magnet for talent and ambition. So, what was the secret sauce? Well, it was this perfect storm of amazing factors. First, you have this incredible geography. The Pampas are some of the most fertile plains in the world. As Europe was industrializing, Argentina basically became its farm, shipping out massive amounts of beef and grain. British money poured in to build a huge railway network to get those goods to port, and millions of Europeans showed up ready to work and build a new life. And look, the rest of the world was just blown away. In 1906, the New York Times wasn't comparing Buenos Aires to other cities in South America. They were comparing it to the greats in the U.S., saying it had the beauty of Washington, the wealth of New York, and the hustle of Chicago. They called it the Paris of South America. And for good reason. It was a shining beacon of prosperity. I mean, it looked like the sky was the limit, right? The future seemed totally secure. But what happens when the entire global system that made you rich just breaks? That golden age was about to hit a wall, and it was going to be brutal. And then, bam, the 1929 stock market crash and the Great Depression that followed was the gut punch. It didn't just hurt Argentina, it completely shattered the world order it relied on. All of a sudden, countries turned inward, global trade basically collapsed, and the demand for all that Argentine beef and grain, it just vanished. So, in response, Argentina's leaders made a decision that would change everything. They looked at their reliance on exports and saw it as a huge weakness. So they adopted this new strategy called import substitution. The idea was pretty simple. Hey, if the world won't buy our stuff, we'll just stop buying their stuff and make everything ourselves. They threw up massive tariffs, effectively closing their economy off from the rest of the world. And this decision to just close themselves off from the world, well, it kicked off a whole new era. Not one of stable growth, but one defined by this chaotic, destructive pattern of political and economic whiplash that would last for decades. It didn't take long for the economic chaos to spill over into politics. In 1930, a military coup ended 70 years of constitutional government, and that set a really dangerous precedent. From there, the country was just thrown into this dizzying cycle of military coups, weak civilian governments, and then, you guessed it, more coups. And right out of this chaos comes this one figure who, to this day, pretty much defines Argentine politics, Juan Perón. His policies were a mix of nationalism and populism. He nationalized huge industries, expanded all sorts of social programs, and, this is absolutely critical for what comes next, he established the habit of just printing money to pay for all that government spending. This constant instability created this toxic pattern that people started calling the stop-go cycle. It worked like this. A government would get in and try to jumpstart the economy with a ton of spending. That would create a short boom, but also massive inflation. So the next government would be forced to slam on the brakes, impose austerity, and cause a painful recession. And then the cycle would just start all over again. For decades, this cycle just ground the country down. You'd think it couldn't get any worse, right? Well, in the late 20th century, it did. It got unimaginably worse, leading to a complete and total economic meltdown. So in 1976, the most brutal military dictatorship in the country's history takes power. And along with all the horrific human rights abuses, they brought economic catastrophe. Check this out. In just 8 years, the national debt ballooned from $8 billion to $45 billion. So when democracy finally came back in 1983, it inherited an absolute disaster. The government fell back on that old, bad habit. They just started printing money. The result was hyperinflation. In 1989, the annual inflation rate hit 5,000%. Prices weren't changing by the day, but by the hour. So let me ask you, what do you even do in that situation? Your entire life savings held in the local currency could be totally worthless by the time you wake up the next morning. For millions of Argentines, the only answer was to ditch the peso altogether, buy US dollars on the black market, and hide them. Under the mattress, behind a picture frame, anywhere. To stop this madness, the government tried something absolutely radical in 1991. They legally pegged the peso 1-to-1 with the US dollar. And on the one hand, it worked. Inflation disappeared overnight. But on the other hand, it was a trap. Having an artificially strong currency crushed their exports. And since they couldn't print money anymore, the government started borrowing and borrowing and borrowing to stay afloat. Well, that trap finally sprang shut in 2001. The country defaulted on $100 billion of debt. At the time, it was the largest default in history. The economy completely collapsed. The country cycled through 5 presidents in just 2 weeks. It was absolute, total chaos. And that chaotic history, that feeling of being completely fed up after 2 more decades of the same old stop-go cycle, brings us right up to today. In 2023, Argentines elected a complete outsider, Javier Milei. His campaign symbol was a chainsaw, representing his promise to finally radically cut the state down to size and break this cycle for good. So, after all this 100-year roller coaster, what are the big takeaways from Argentina's story? Because its history isn't just some local tragedy. It's a really powerful set of lessons for any country, anywhere. This might be the most staggering fact of all. After more than 100 years of what was supposed to be progress, Argentina's GDP per person today is roughly the same as it was way back in 1913. It's truly a lost century of growth, all while the rest of the world shot forward. You know, when you boil it all down, Argentina's story screams a few key lessons at us. First, strong institutions like independent courts and property rights are the absolute bedrock of prosperity. Second, you have to have fiscal discipline. Printing money to pay your bills is a guaranteed recipe for disaster. And finally, policy consistency is key. These wild swings from one extreme to another just destroy the confidence you need for any kind of long-term investment or growth. And all of this leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? With this new, incredibly radical approach now being put to the test, is this it? Is this the moment Argentina finally escapes its past? Or is this just the beginning of another chaotic chapter in a century-long cycle of crisis? Honestly, only time is going to tell.